Hey guys, it's Alex with Hammond Watch. I'm here today with the Pagani design PD-1644. This is their ceramic Daytona Homage, and in all honesty, it's a watch I really had mixed feelings about. So I was excited to get it in person and spend a couple of weeks with it before making this video, and I wanted to share it with you today. So what we're going to do is run through sizing and specifications. I want to show you what it looks like in the dark and on wrist. And then at the end, we'll talk about cost and value, and then touch on Homage watches in general. In the current watch climate, I feel a lot of opinions are starting to shift on Homage watches, and I'm certainly no different. The case size on this watch, and I took a few measurements to really help you kind of understand. If you exclude the crown guard and then go opposite side, you're looking at 40.5 millimeters. If you include the crown guard, you're looking at 42 or just a shade over. And then from the tip of the crown itself to the 9 o'clock position, you're looking at 44.4. The thickness is relatively thin at 11.5 millimeters. Utilizing that quartz movement really helped keep things petite. You have a 7 millimeter screw down crown. It is signed with the Pagani logo. And I will say it's probably one of the highlights of the watch. The gripping on the crown is extremely well executed, and it threads a lot smoother than I expected. The screw down pushers that you use to operate the chronograph, I measure at 5.5 millimeters. When I measure, I do it with the crown unscrewed, as this is how you'll actually utilize it. I think it's a better representation of its sizing rather than kind of the small piece that protrudes in the locked or screwed in position. The lug tip to lug tip, it's pretty short at 48 millimeters. That said, if you wear the watch on bracelet, and I imagine you might because they did a pretty good job with it, it does have a protruding end link, so you're looking at more of an effective lug to lug, right around 52 millimeters, which was just a shade longer than I expected from the piece. The lug width is 20 millimeters, so nice and standard. You're not going to have any issues with finding strap options, and being kind of a simple color scheme. This thing really is a strap monster. You can kind of go nuts and have fun with different bright colors. But the bracelet itself is really well done. Solid stainless steel links. You do have a polished mid link, and I think a really wonderful taper. It starts at 20 millimeters and gets all the way down to about 15.8 before jumping up back to 18 for this clasp. The clasp itself is very much kind of that Rolex lift lock style, where this piece kind of pivots independent of the rest of the clasp and unhinges itself. Everything is milled out very nicely. You can see from the underside here that you get solid end links as well. You have screw links, so adjusting the sizing is relatively easy. On some of those more affordable watches that utilize a pin and collar system, it can really be a pain to try to get the sizing just right. My only gripe with this is accessing the micro adjustments, and you do have 3 micro adjust on the inside of this clasp. But to get to them, you have to fold this piece out. And at least on this one, it's pretty tricky. It's got a lot of resistance, but finally pops out. You can see one of the micro adjusts there where it is, and then the third one here. Once that piece is opened up, you can access the spring bar and move it, but you can only access the spring bar on one side. It's a little bit tricky, but in general, I think a small gripe for how much quality they did pack into the bracelet overall. The watch's screw-down case back has some light engraving that illustrates just the basic specifications, and that the watch is stainless steel, water resistance of 100 meters, and then the Pagani design sport branding with the reference number of the watch and that PD-1644. Underneath the watch's screw-down case back, you can see its Seiko Mecha Quartz movement. This is a VK63A. I was pretty sure they advertised it as a VK67, but it really doesn't matter. You're going to end up with an accuracy of plus or minus 20 seconds a month. And you can see the watch does utilize a plastic movement holder but considering the price point, I think that's completely acceptable. While I'm not going to pat Pagani on the back for the design language, they did a good job with the execution. The ceramic bezels tachymeter scale is very well executed. Everything's very clean. There's no inconsistencies with the paint. Behind the watch is sapphire crystal. The dial is also well executed. The printing is pretty crisp and clear. The applied indices look very nice, as do the hands. There aren't any tabs or rough marks showing where they were attached to a larger piece of metal, which sometimes you can get in these more affordable pieces. If you aren't familiar with the layout of this watch, the dial at 3 o'clock is a 24-hour dial. Then you have a running seconds at 6 o'clock. And then at 9 o'clock, that's actually your minute counter. When you engage the chronograph, the large seconds hand or your main seconds hand will sweep all the way through. As it hits the 60-second mark, this will tick, representing 1 minute. So you'll get a full hour of timing, which for day-to-day circumstances I think is completely reasonable. You can then stop and then reset to 0 and time again if you'd like. The applied indices represent one of the things that I will kind of gripe about. And again, all things considered, you expect to have a few flaws, but around some of these plots, in certain light, you can see where the dial kind of dips in and is kind of pressed. And it's not my favorite thing in the world, but it's not really something you notice except when the light hits it just perfectly. Also, right around the date window, you can see the paint thins out and you can see the material of the dial just beneath. Again, a relatively small complaint, but it's certainly something I wanted to touch on. All things considered, I'm really impressed with the lume application on this watch. You get a nice vivid green glow. I do appreciate that you get small lume plots at 3, 6, and 9. And while the glow doesn't last as long as some of the Seiko models that we're all familiar with, you do get several hours of low light visibility, which to me is extremely impressive, especially when you start considering the cost. Here we are in my 7.5 to 7 3/4 inch wrist. I'm a pretty big fan of how this watch wears. You know, my sweet spot is kind of that 39 to 41 millimeter range. So this fits squarely in that. It's very nice and thin, so it wears close and doesn't feel wobbly at all. And then having that aggressive taper on the bracelet means that as you articulate your wrist, nothing's digging in or feeling cumbersome. So I really couldn't be happier with the comfort level. All right, so let's talk about the pricing. As of today, and keep in mind, AliExpress and Amazon prices fluctuate pretty frequently, so don't hold me to these numbers, but if you're patient, they always tend to come back. Right now on AliExpress, you can pick this watch up for $72 USD shipped, which to me is just an incredible value. If you don't want to wait as long, you can pick them up from Amazon for right around $88, and I think that still represents a tremendous value. These things are extremely robust. Having that quartz movement, while it may turn some people off, does add to how rugged the piece is overall. 100 meters of water resistance might not sound like much, but when you're adding in screw down crown, pushers, and case back, I think it inspires a little bit more confidence. And then having the ceramic and sapphire means you're not going to deal with the piece getting really scratched up. So I think you're absolutely getting more than you pay for. And that's not even mentioning the bracelet, which is so well executed. So I'm a big fan of the overall value. I don't know that there's many competitors kind of in that sub $100 range. If you know any that you think are better equipped, put them in the comments below. You know, I'm always looking for new watches to review, and that might help me pick out a few new candidates. And I want to touch on the Homage thing, because this watch, I had conflicting feelings about it for so long, because when the ceramic Daytona came out, it wasn't just a grail watch, it was one I was actively chasing. And watching the prices jump from, you know, $15,000 to $20,000 to $30,000, you know, now I see these for sale in the high $40,000s and $50,000 range, and it really just kind of took the wind out of my sails. You know, I'm not going to pay that much for a watch. You know, A, I couldn't really afford it, and then B, I wouldn't feel comfortable wearing a $40,000, $50,000 watch on my wrist. You know, guys that buy these as investments and still see upside, you know, more power to you. But, you know, the Rolex ceramic Daytona just drifted into an area of the watch market that, in all honesty, it doesn't make fiscal sense to me. So I had to let that dream go a little bit, and watching so many Rolex watches go, you know, up market and get more expensive, I've really softened on Homage watches because you're getting so much more value. You know, I think that a lot of people in the industry are kind of getting there, where when these watches were what we would consider more reasonable, it made sense to make them like a life goal. But once you hit a certain price bracket, I think it just becomes absurd, and a lot of us have been kind of turned off by the pricing jumps and Rolex trying to go even further up market. Let me know if you guys have kind of noticed that too in general. You know, I'm not a big sub Homage fan because there's so many out there. But when I see, like, I think it's the Invicta was at 1953, and Steinhardt was doing a couple vintage Rolexes that were just ridiculously cost, like, those never bothered me. But even now with some of these modern watches, you know, for what you're able to get here for the cost, the Rolex counterparts just make less and less sense. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Sorry to ramble there at the end. Go ahead and give us a thumbs up if you did. Also consider subscribing. I put watch content out weekly at a minimum, and hope to see you in the next one.